Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken, and welcome back to another video. Today, I want to take a break from my Path of Exile addiction to talk about Lash, who is one of my absolute favorite characters in Deadlock. He's super stylish, he's got a crazy personality, and his kit is one of the most fun in the entire game. That being said, he's also kinda bad right now. A lot of people think that he's not really in a great spot right now, and it's due to a number of different factors. And ultimately, I think Lash is probably one of the more difficult characters to truly balance in this game because of the nature of his kit, and so that's what I want to discuss today. And I do want this to be more of a discussion-style video, so I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below to the things that I have to say in this video. But first, let's talk about why Lash is so bad in the first place. What makes this character bad? I mean, after all, doesn't he do a lot of things really well? He's super mobile, he does a lot of damage if you slam someone from super high up, and he has an incredible ultimate that can have some of the most impact in the entire game. All of that is true. However, there's one very important thing about Lash, and that is the fact that he is also the most telegraphed character in the entire game. Every single one of his abilities allows the enemies to have a lot of time to react to it. I mean, think about it. This grapple here, it literally attaches to the enemy and gives them a giant indicator that Lash is flying right over top of them. And then the slam, well, if you do it from the optimal distance away, which is as high up as possible, then the enemies have like a second to react, to actually get out of the way or block it with some kind of ability before you finally hit the ground. And his ultimate, same thing. It has a 1-second lock-on just like this, giving the enemies time to react. And so the only thing that's really not reactable is his flog, which has a limited range, so if Lash is up close to you, you can expect to be flogged at some point. And, well, his gun. But I mean, every character has a gun. And, as far as guns go, Lash's gun freaking sucks. Can we just talk about how bad this is? Like, it's a 3-round burst gun, okay, I mean, that's fine, whatever, who cares? But the damage just kind of isn't really there. It doesn't scale very well, and if you play Lash with an optimal build, which plays around his abilities, spirit damage, ulting, stuff like that, then you're usually not getting gun items anyways, and so, like, this gun then at that point just kind of becomes a cosmetic feature that you only use to kill minions, and even then, sometimes it's just faster to flog the minions or slam the minions instead. Like, this gun just sucks so bad. Arguably one of the worst guns in the entire game. On top of that, Lash is a very buggy character, one of the most buggy characters in the entire game. And this is, of course, an early access game, so I wouldn't be surprised if Valve eventually makes a solid attempt to fix most of the bugs that Lash has. But, of course, Lash, basically all three of his abilities here, have just a random chance to, like, completely miss, I've found. Like, sometimes you can ground strike somebody, and especially if they're on some kind of slope or stairs or something like that, it'll just flat out miss. Or the flog, for some random reason, will just miss. And it doesn't help that the angle of the flog is actually variable throughout the match. As you get more spirit power, you get more attack angle, and so, you know, in the early game you might miss a flog that in the late game you would not miss, and then you'll just be really confused. That, like, adds to the confusion. But then also the ultimate can sometimes pick somebody up and then not actually pull them up and slam them somewhere else, or it'll just not pick them up at all, or it'll throw them somewhere really weird, or like a million different bugs can happen with the Death Slam as well. And so you're playing a character whose abilities aren't even consistent when you play Lash, which certainly adds to the pain. But alright, okay, so Lash's abilities still hit most of the time. It's not that incredibly buggy, and even though he is pretty telegraphed, it's still, you know, pretty hard to, like, dodge roll away or jump over a slam or something like that, and there are only a couple of characters in the game that really have some sort of hard ability that can just completely block one of his attacks, right? Like, you have Viscus's Cube, Pocket's Briefcase, Dynamo's Quantum Entanglement, but that's really, you know, that's about it. There's really not much in the way of blocking Lash's abilities. Or is there? You see, there are a couple of things that really make Lash kind of unplayable in the current meta, and it's probably the biggest source of his pain. You see, Deadlock has a very robust and fantastic item store, and I love this item shop to pieces, but there are a couple of items that really just kind of kill this character right now, especially because of how accessible and popular they are. The first and most obvious one is, of course, Counterspell. This item is arguably the best item in the game against Lash because it's cheaper than the other hardcore counters to Lash, and it just provides you so much value, not just against Lash, but against a lot of other abilities in the game too, some of which are probably on the enemy team. So yeah, Counterspell basically allows you to parry an ability. So for the next, roughly a second, it's a little under a second now because they've kept nerfing the duration, but for basically a second after parrying, you are immune to enemy abilities and items. And so you can just time your Counterspell for Lash's very telegraphed abilities, including, of course, his ultimate, allowing you to completely deny huge entire swaths of his kit. And not only do you counter that, but you also benefit from countering it, because you get healed, you get a bunch of spirit power, 20 spirit power is quite a lot, and you get movement speed for the next 6 seconds after parrying. And Counterspell has a 20-second cooldown. So if Lash gets one of his abilities countered, sure, he'll be able to hit a couple of follow-up abilities, but it won't be long before he has to deal with a Counterspell again. And in a similar vein, Ethereal Shift is also a very popular item on a lot of different characters, like Victor and Seven. And while it has been pretty hardcore nerfed recently with a 45-second cooldown, now more than double what it once was, it's still a very powerful item because it kind of just does the same thing as Counterspell but better, because you get more time to just completely block so many different effects, and you also get a bunch of really, really powerful buffs when you exit, more powerful than the Counterspell buffs. So yeah, Ethereal Shift is really, really good against Lash as well. And if you want to just stack up some pure spirit damage reduction to basically become immune to Lash's damage, you can do that too. Not only is Spirit Resilience really good, it gives you 60% spirit resist when you're low, but you can also get Spellbreaker, which, yeah, this item's just evil against Lash. 75% spirit damage reduction against the next instance of high spirit damage you take. So if he does 175 damage or more, yeah, that basically doesn't exist anymore. Like, he gets completely hard countered by this item, and it has an even lower internal cooldown than Counterspell of 10 seconds, and even when it's on cooldown, it still gives spirit resist and debuff resist. So, even if you want to try and stun somebody with your ultimate, they're going to wake up from that faster too thanks to this item. It really is just a mess. And you'll notice that all of these items, while they are especially good at countering Lash, they're also very accessible items that a lot of characters would pick up anyways, even if Lash wasn't in the match. Spirit Resilience is very useful, Counterspell is extremely useful, a lot of characters build for Ethereal Shift, again, if you're playing Victor, you buy this every game, and Spellbreaker, if you have a lot of Spirit Bursts on the enemy team just in general, it's a very, very good option. And so there really are just a lot of ways to counter Lash, and you don't have to go that far out of your way to get them, and oftentimes you want to end up buying these items anyways, even if Lash isn't there. But to further realize why Lash is so impacted by these items compared to other characters, let's compare him to another somewhat similar character, Pocket. Pocket also does a lot of Spirit Bursts, they like to get up close and personal with the enemies, and they also get countered by a lot of these items. Counterspell counters them, Spirit Damage Reduction counters them, so in many ways they're very similar. Both of them even like to buy Majestic Leap, and so, yeah, surely Pocket is also like D-tier trash, right? Well, no, Pocket actually isn't, and there are a couple of reasons for this. First of all, Pocket isn't solely reliant on Spirit Burst damage to deal damage. They have their Barrage, which is 4 smaller instances of Spirit damage, and this still ends up being a pretty big component. They also do have 2 sources of Burst damage, with the Cloak and the Satchel, just like this, very similar to Lash. But both of these abilities provide a bit more utility. Both Pocket and Lash, of course, have movements with this Burst ability, but then while Lash only gets a little bit of healing from his Flog, Pocket gets to completely avoid all sorts of damage, and this ability actually counters Lash, so, that's great. And of course, when it comes to their ultimates, both of them are countered by Counterspell, that is for sure, but Pocket is able to do a lot of damage over time with their ultimate, which kind of just mitigates how much that's impacted by, avoiding a single burst of damage. And also, Pocket's gun is just straight up so much better, especially especially if you have 4 barrage stacks like this. Like this thing, even with just a couple of gun items, even with just like a cultist sacrifice, for example, this thing actually kind of hits like a truck. It's crazy. So Pocket definitely wins out in that department too. But ultimately, Pocket ends up putting themselves a lot less at risk than Lash when it comes to actually dealing their damage. And that's the next thing I want to talk about, is the risk factor when it comes to playing Lash. You see, Lash has to get really up close and personal to deal his damage. And while Pocket also has to do the same, Pocket has ways to actually mitigate how much risk they're taking when they get up close. And this is mainly due to the fact that they have 2 abilities that help to get them out of dodge after the fact. So you can use the Cloak, and you can teleport basically anywhere, and you can use the Satchel to also block a lot of damage. And the Cloak is not reliant on having an enemy nearby to actually traverse somewhere. You can just send this thing anywhere you want, then bam, you're like up here now. So hey, that's pretty cool. And this Cloak, obviously, the Satchel rather, blocks a lot of damage, gives them immunity frames, and gives them a window of opportunity to escape things or to block big attacks that would otherwise get them killed. And the Barrage is a fantastic ability because it allows them to float in the air and determine if it's even safe to actually go in the first place. And it synergizes so well with Majestic Leap in a way that's really good for not just map traversal, but also good for gathering intel during a fight, repositioning during a fight, jumping on enemies, and then using their other abilities to then escape. So now let's compare that to Lash. Lash's main damage ability here, the Ground Strike, has him jump directly onto a target just like this. So, you know, you have to be up close with the enemy, similar to Pocket, right? Except this leaves him completely exposed. Like I said, this is a super duper telegraphed ability, right? You kind of just go down in a straight line and the enemies know you're going to be right on top of them. And so this is actually a prime time for a lot of enemy heroes to hit their big abilities. You could hit Haze's Sleep, you could hit all kinds of burst damage, you could hit any kind of stun, Abrams charge, etc. And there's not really much Lash can do about it because he doesn't have any immunity frames or anything of the sort. He doesn't even get a survivability bonus like any DR or anything during the Ground Strike. He's basically naked, which is a scary thought to think about. But then his movement ability is also a little bit rough. It is definitely useful for in-combat traversal, don't get me wrong, but it is also, again, super telegraphed, not just because the enemy knows that you're flying directly overhead thanks to the grapple, but also because it sends you in a very clean, straight arc directly above the enemy each and every time, which is very predictable. If we compare that to Pocket again, Pocket is able to play mind games with their teleport, because they don't have to teleport to it at the end of the day. They can choose to stay here and kind of like parkour back here, and then like maybe bait the enemies and then teleport, or not teleport. You can do a lot of things with the Flying Cloak. And that's only one ability. You get extra survivability in the meantime from the satchels. So they have 2 options to kind of juke the enemies and outplay them while they're actually in the fight. So Lash puts himself at a lot more risk than a lot of other up-close and personal characters, and he doesn't have much to actually use to survive once he gets there. I mean, he has the Flog for a little bit of healing, but that's about it. It's kind of paltry when you look at Pocket's options in comparison. And so Lash ends up being a character who is super telegraphed, super easy to counter with a lot of convenient items that you don't have to go really that far out of your way for, and well, yeah, he just puts himself at a lot more risk than other characters. Lash's early game also really sucks compared to a lot of heroes. He's not really able to have as much impact as some of the stronger laners like Calvin or Viscous. And part of this comes down to the fact that he's a very movement-focused character, but the lane doesn't have a lot of geometry that allows him to get super high, and he doesn't have a lot of mobility right away. I mean, at the start of the game, you're not able to get Stamina Mastery, you're not able to get Majestic Leap, and, well, I mean, your grapple is your only real movement tool, but if you use it to engage, then it's very hard to disengage after your super telegraphed slam. And the slam also just isn't really hitting that hard compared to the risk that you put yourself at when you are trying to use it. And it's much safer and still more effective to use something like Viscous Splatter, which does similar damage, but, you know, at more of a distance. And while there certainly is some geometry that you can use to get some big, beefy slams with Lash in the early lane, like this high ground here on the yellow lane, it is very predictable. People know that Lash is going to try and go up here and then slam down, and so they can just play at angles and positions where he's not able to get to them as easily. And so you might want to play much farther back here, or just play closer to your Guardian or anything like that, and you can avoid the Lash pretty easily. And also, you can really see him coming. I mean, you have time to react if he's going to slam you from up there. Lash still has so much potential to be amazing, and it's not like he is unplayable. In fact, quite the opposite. You see, Deadlock is still, I would say, a very well-balanced game in the sense that even a bad character like Lash still has the potential to carry the game. I mean, this ultimate is incredible stuff. You all have seen at one point or another a Lash ult that has won the game by just scooping up a whole bunch of enemies, knocking them down, and killing them with your team. And it's incredible to behold. Truly one of the most fun things in the entire game. And Lash is still able to do things to mitigate how much the enemies are able to counter him. One very popular thing is to get a Silence Wave, and while this Silence Wave won't block everything, like the Counterspell and Ethereal Shift, it will still, at the very least, reduce the enemy's Spirit Resist and block abilities like Viscus's Cube from going off, allowing him to slam the enemies much better. And when he does slam, if he builds for it, he's able to get a lot of damage, for sure. I mean, just with like a slam build here, we can get a whole bunch of items that will allow us to really beat the crap out of the enemies and do just a ton of damage. Look at how much damage the slam does. Yeah, that's pretty good. Still not as good as you could get with some other burst characters who put themselves at far less risk, though. Gosh, somebody help Lash. But yeah, the other factor to consider is skill. It certainly does take a level of skill to counter the Lash. Even if you know that you have to buy Counterspell against the Lash, having the reaction time to block his attacks, especially in a team fight, is, you know, it's kind of tough, and a lot of lower skill players don't have the ability to do that as easily. And so then Lash actually becomes much more of a threat, and a character who's much more capable of carrying games at the mid to lower ranks. And so in that case, is there even really a problem with Lash? Is he even really that bad? Well, I mean, that's something you can answer in the comments. That also begs the question of if Lash even needs any changes, because after all, if Lash is actually like reasonably fine for most of the player base, and he's really only bad at the higher ranks like Ascendant and Eternus, then is that a problem? And if people aren't able to counter him as easily because they're less skilled at the game, then is he just fine? And this is kind of a topic that's up for debate and open for discussion, because there is a very real, I guess, distinction between choosing whether you want to balance for the more average player or the more skilled player. And in a case like this, I do think it actually makes a little bit more sense to try and balance Lash and fix him for the higher ranks, because what happens in a game such as this is that over time, people at the mid and lower skill levels eventually catch up to some of the strategies that the higher elo people are using as more knowledge proliferates throughout the community and as more time passes and people generally start to learn more about the game. And so over time, people are going to have an easier and easier and easier time countering Lash because they're going to become more and more familiar with the strategies to do so and the very easily accessible items that you can use to counter Lash. And so I think it would definitely help to try and figure out what's wrong with Lash right now and try to fix his current state when it comes to balance before it gets to that point where he's unplayable for even more players in the community. And so if we are going to try and fix Lash, it then leads into another question. Should we either buff Lash, nerf the items and counterplay that exists against Lash, or maybe a mix of both? And this is really where I'd love to hear from you in the comments section especially, because, well, I don't have all of the answers. First of all, I do think that it would be good to buff Lash at least a little bit. He did catch some nerfs over the past couple of updates, both direct and indirect. He lost a bit of damage and a bit of range on the ground strike, which honestly, I didn't really think that he needed. And also, the wall jump stamina nerf has actually nerfed his capabilities quite a bit, because Lash is the type of character who loves to use his stamina to kind of stall himself in the air, and now he's just able to do that a little bit less. And so, I mean, I don't think there's really anything that can be done about that in regards to Lash, except, I mean, maybe if you really wanted to, give him a passive that allows him to not use stamina for wall jumps, but then, like, why even make the change in the first place? Because I feel like that change was mostly targeted towards high mobility characters like Lash. So I don't really know if that's the right answer. And I think nerfing some of the items that are particularly strong against Lash would also maybe make sense. We've already seen a big ethereal shift nerf, and that was definitely warranted, and honestly, I'm happy to see it, and I don't really know if I would even want to nerf this item further. But Counterspell could possibly receive a couple of more nerfs, because it is very, very, very strong against Lash and a lot of other characters. And honestly, just having the ability to parry an ability by itself, I think, is really strong. If you remember, Fortitude also had a lot of benefits at one point. You would get the health regen much faster, and it also gave you a lot of weapon damage when you were above 75% health. They completely stripped the weapon damage from the item, and it's still pretty much fine, you know? It's a good item, it's not mandatory, but a lot of characters still pick it up. I think a similar thing could happen to Counterspell. It doesn't necessarily need to give you like 20 spirit power, for example. I think that's a little bit crazy. Just being able to parry an ability and not take that damage, and in some cases not take that CC from something like Wraithult, is utterly insane, especially for the value. It's only a tier 3 item, so I think that this could see some changes as well. But if you don't want to nerf the items as hard, then something you could try doing instead is giving Lash a bit more power in the early game so he has more impact throughout the match, because, well, Lash is in a tricky situation right now. He sucks in the early game, as I already mentioned, and he sucks in the late game because everybody has these counterplay items online, so he really is only good at a sweet spot in the mid game, and giving him a bit more early impact would make him a much better character. Now, I don't know what this would necessarily look like. Maybe more base damage on his abilities when you're starting out, maybe a lower cooldown on ground strike in the early game, or something like that. I'm not really sure what the specific balance would look like there. But that might be the other direction that you could try to take Lash. But ultimately, balancing Lash is a very difficult subject, and I won't pretend for a second to have all the answers. But I do hope that I've done a pretty good job of explaining what makes Lash so tricky to balance right now, because, well, he's able to have a lot of impact even right now, but he's also in kind of a rough spot when it comes to balancing, and a lot of players have figured out good ways to counter him super hard and make him just really not that super good right now, or super enjoyable to play, because you just keep seeing all your abilities get countered over and over again. So let me know what you think about Lash in the comments section down below, because, well, at the end of the day, he's still one of the absolute coolest characters in the entire game, and one of the most fun heroes I've had the pleasure of playing throughout, honestly, my entire time playing video games. He has such a fun gameplay loop, such a really just amazing character design through and through, and it sucks to see him in kind of a weak state right now, because, well, I think a strong Lash is a fun Lash. Obviously, still want him to be somewhat fair, but I think he could use a bit of a tune-up and a bit more power right now. So, again, leave your thoughts in the comments section down below. Make sure to like this video if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more discussion videos and more of all sorts of other videos from me coming on the channel. I'm trying to start a whole bunch of different series and doing different things on the channel, just experimenting with Deadlock content, whether it's spectating initiates, grinding to initiate, grinding to Eternus. Excuse me. But yeah, just stuff like that. So subscribe so you don't miss out on any of that. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.